Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a graphic novel that I read. I am back on that graphic novel grind. It is a part of a series that I have been exploring lately, and it's about a 22-year-old man who is trying to pursue a relationship, but finds himself having to fight off some evil exes. I am referring to Scott Pilgrim Volume 2 by Bryan Lee O'Malley, and this was published sometime around 2005. I've talked a little bit about Bryan Lee O'Malley before on this channel, but he is a Canadian writer, and I'd suggest you go check out my Volume 1 entry on Bryan Lee O'Malley and what he's all about, having written a fair amount of comics and graphic novels, and being an illustrator. He drew the art panels in this volume himself, and he's a very interesting kind of person. I think he's written a bunch, but this is the only series that I'm familiar with that he's done. And I have the paperback version of this. You might recall that I had the hardcover that I bought, which is going to be an uneven kind of collection that I have now. This is in black and white, which I thought was pretty. Not my favorite, but it does. I still think that O'Malley captures the atmosphere that he's trying to do in this series. So a lot of congratulations, and I think you'll see that around when I summarize the video. But without further ado, let's talk about Volume 2. I will do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So Scott Pilgrim Volume 2 focuses, of course, on Scott Pilgrim once again. At the start of this volume, there's a bit of an exploration with Scott's past before he moved to Toronto, and his relationship with Kim, who is the current drummer of his band. They apparently had a bit of a relationship, and he was in another band with her, and they were pretty hot and heavy, and it seemed to be a pretty decent relationship. But he broke up with her at some point when he moved to Toronto, and we don't quite know why they broke up or anything like that. All we know is that she's very jaded right now, and it might be because of how Scott treated her, some unspoken thing that we don't quite know about yet. But then it flashes forward to the present moment, where Scott is having to deal with Ramona's evil exes, and he's also still kind of with Knives. He hasn't broken up with her, but he's given an ultimatum where he does, and he in fact does break up with her, where he at least notes that he's too old for her, although Knives does not take it too well, and kind of gets really angry at Ramona in the process, where she feels that Ramona is responsible, although she doesn't quite know why. Scott realizes that he has to fight Lucas Lee, an actor who happens to be Ramona's second evil ex. He does a bunch of research on him, where he finds out that he's a pretty cool skateboarder. And Ramona tells him that Lucas was pretty much a nothing when they dated in high school, and they dated for a pretty short time. And she says that nothing became of it, and she didn't really see anything in him, and she didn't really break up with him for any particular reason. She just decided to do it, which strikes Scott as very unusual. At the same time this is happening, Knives dyes her hair a different color and swears a blood feud against Ramona because she senses that something is weird with her. And indeed, later she does kind of realize that Scott cheated on Knives, or Scott cheated on her with Ramona, and so she's like, Scott can do no wrong, it's all Ramona's fault. And so she sets about plotting against her. And at the same time, Scott has a fight with Lucas Lee on a Hollywood set. Lucas is pretty much kicking his butt. And Lucas also reveals that what Ramona said wasn't true, or at least from his perspective, Ramona cheated on him with some other pretty boy guy, which goes against with what Ramona said. It might be that Lucas is lying. Who is to say until we find out a little later? But Scott has a fight with Lucas, and it doesn't go well, and he challenges Lucas to a skate-off down a very long hill where Lucas grinds on some of the rails on the side, and he ends up biffing it, and that means that Scott wins there. Later on, while Ramona is with Scott's sister at a mall, Knives shows up and challenges Ramona to a fight, and they engage in a pretty cool, stylistically interesting fight. Although Knives can't beat up Ramona, and so she eventually flees, but she does realize that Scott had cheated on her at that point. And while Scott is alone, he receives a phone call from Envy Adams, who reveals that she's going to be in town this week, inviting Scott's band to play alongside her. But it's clear that Scott and Envy had a relationship at one point, but Envy broke up with him, and it devastated him pretty hard. And a short while later, when the band is set to play, Scott and Ramona are listening, and Scott reveals that Envy's current boyfriend, Todd, got in the way of their relationship, and so Envy cheating on Scott with Todd is the reason they broke up. And Ramona also reveals that she had dated Todd, and he is her third evil ex, and that's where it ends there. In terms of analysis, there is some more things to think about with Volume 2. I feel like the recurring theme throughout the series is how careless Scott is, or how troubled he is in his romantic endeavors. Particularly, he seems like the bad guy in most of his relationships. He seems to be stringing Knives along and without a real goal. Especially in the first volume, he has no clear idea in mind what he's doing, and it seems to be just like a rebound relationship where he's just with her, maybe because she doesn't really have a goal either, because she's just like a 17-year-old, and he knows that this is like non-committal, so he can be with this girl until he feels better about life. Kind of a real asshole kind of move, because he's really hurting Knives. Like, she could be with other people who want to be with her, rather than someone who's just probably passing the time. And it's clear that he's also hurt Kim in the past. They had a really great relationship, but they broke up for some reason, and Kim comes off as jaded and very hurt in life. And so what did Scott do to Kim to hurt her like this? It's clear that he wanted to be with her because he fought a bunch of dudes to be with her, which is very interesting. Someone kidnapped her, so he fought a bunch of people. And after he was with her, something bad happened. And it's clearly Scott's fault. And so my question is, are we supposed to like Scott here? Like, it's clear that he's the villain in his own relationships at times. He causes a lot of people hurt, and he's asking a lot of questions of Ramona, and he's forcing her to dredge up her romantic past, which can't be good for her. But he's also forcing her to confront her bad relationships and re-examine her own internal self. So maybe that's good, but it still presents the question, are we supposed to like Scott? Because he doesn't seem like a good person. And I know, like, in any comic book, in any series, we have a character who we're supposed to follow from a place where they're not so great to a place where they're even better. But it seems like O'Malley is starting Scott at a point where he's a bad kind of person, not a very quality character. And it's at such a point where, like, I can't really see Scott as redeemable, especially because he keeps hurting people. But it's also, maybe I'm thinking too much about this, and maybe the point is that Scott is a bad person, And we'll find out later, like, people who confront him about this. And I believe that's what happened in the movie. But I'm sure the series has a different way of exploring this. So perhaps it's the case that I'm just impatient. But regardless, O'Malley does a really good job of presenting Scott as the villain here. And I do think that is the intention. Another thing we're talking about is the different romantic perspectives we see, especially from like Scott and Ramona. Where Scott clearly views his relationships differently than his exes. Where he has for Envy, Envy and Scott's relationship was really big, and he clearly viewed it as pretty grand and great. And so when he got hurt, that was the greatest hurt of his life, and he still hasn't recovered by the second volume in this series. And Envy, she clearly valued the relationship, but I don't think she saw it to the extent that Scott sees it. And Kem, the same thing might happen for Kem and Scott, where Kem probably felt a lot of love in her relationship, and maybe Scott did too, but not to the same extent. And so when that happens, someone's going to get hurt. The same thing happens with Ramona and Lucas Lee that we see in this volume, where Ramona clearly enjoyed her relationship with Lucas Lee, but it wasn't meant to last in her eyes, and so it, as quick as it began, it flamed out, and it didn't really end for any specific reason. But it clearly had an impact on Lucas, because he saw it as her kind of cheating on him, and the next thing he knew, she was with some pretty boy. So Ramona seems kind of temperamental in her relationships, and it might be the case. I think Ramona went from Lucas to Todd, and in Lucas's eyes, that was really fast. And so Lucas is kind of warning Scott, beware of what's going to happen, because you're just going to end up one of her exes down the road. And I do think that's interesting, how Ramona can see it as not a big relationship in her eyes, but Lucas can see it as an important relationship for him that left him hurt and heartbroken. And I guess it's fascinating how in every relationship, even my own, we can behave that way, or we can hurt people without realizing it. And I think that's the case in love, is sometimes you're going to get hurt, and not everyone is going to see the love that they shared in the same way. And despite me enjoying this volume, there are still some problems that I mentioned in the first volume too. There's of course the gay jokes that are used constantly throughout the series, particularly with Scott and Wallace, where it's kind of implied that Scott and Wallace are sleeping together, and indeed they are sleeping together, because they're so poor they can't afford another bed. But that's used as an excuse to say, LOL, Scott and Wallace are gay together. I hope they have a relationship or something like that. And it really seems like being gay is seen as a joke in this series, which given the time, that makes a lot of sense, because being gay was seen as a joke around 2005. But it still comes off as pretty dated here. It makes it so this doesn't stay fresh as well as it could have. And then another problem is that they overuse the word retard. They say the word retard quite a bit. And again, you're by making the word retard into a joke, you're making it seem like those with developmental disabilities are a joke. And you can say, oh, it's just a word, it doesn't mean anything. But yes, it does mean something, because you're implying that a person has a developmental disability by saying retard. You could say, oh, I'm just calling that person stupid, but then you're still saying that people who aren't intelligent in the same way that everyone else is are worthy of being a joke. So regardless of what your interpretation of that is, I do feel that O'Malley has used the word retard too often in this series. And I do think that the movie version did a good job of just cutting out that dumb dialogue. It kept the gay jokes for some reason, but it got rid of most of everything else. So a lot of problematic writing that I feel dates this very heavily at times.